Next up, Fred Cameron. Fred was born in Daytona Beach, Florida, to Fred and Lillian Cameron. And another past recipient that we've had with us was Lee Hazen. Lee passed away earlier this year, but they were friends in Florida, met and continued to do some work up here. He grew up playing the guitar, tinkering around. Found out he did also have a connection to the Allman Brothers because his guitar instructor was also teaching one of those guys as well. He joined the Navy. While there, they were looking for a band, and he put one together for him, so most of his duty was spent playing in a band in the Navy. Fred was, in 1969, Fred was offered a position in Nashville's Athena Records, and while there he became interested in electronic music, and I think probably a lot of you around that time remember the Moog, and there was a well-known album that came out called Switched on Bach, and Rick Powell, who was with Athena Records, thought it would be a good idea to do one on country music, which was called Switched on Nashville. And this is in Fred's bio, so I didn't make this up because he recognized it. Let me just pick up. He recorded some early Moog records, Electric Hair recorded on the Moog modular, and the indisputably awful Switched on Nashville. And we did put a little bit of that in the music as you came in, but not much. But it is there. However, he was forward-looking and knew that electronic music was part of the future, although that was a little questionable at the time. But he went on in 1971. He was hired as a freelance engineer at Monument Recording Studios here in town, and also for Buddy Killen's new studio, Sound Shop. This freelance work occasionally took him out of Nashville. On one occasion, Fred traveled to London, England as tracking engineer for an instrumental gospel album that included the London Festival Orchestra. At some point during the setup, we've all had these horror moments when we worked, particularly live sound. The producer was informed that there was no vocalist or solo artist. The orchestra was the default artist. It wasn't in the budget to have one. Fred had a solution. He had his own vocals to the track, singing Up on Cripple Creek over at least one of the songs. After being hired by Bob McKenzie to do a live recording at the Masonic Temple in Muncie, Indiana, Fred was impressed with the potential profit he made with a remote recording unit, and to that end built Celebration Sound, a remote truck here in town. Next slide. They went on to work with the Oak Ridge Boys and Oak Valley Sound. And the video, and he worked also in the audience today is Glenn Reef over here, and they worked, Fred and Glenn worked at a company called Bullfrog Audio, installing building consoles. And later on shifted into modifying current equipment and modifying, as we said before, microphones. And his compressor in the upper right-hand corner is a 4-rack space high piece of gear. And I'm told that the power supply was the same size, so not exactly compact by any stretch of the imagination. And the console in the bottom left is the one that he built for the Celebration recording truck. And the video, please.
First time I met Freddie was at Athena Recording Studio and Record Company in Brentwood. Rick Powell ran it. And it was just one of these little tiny little independents. They had a couple of investors. And Freddie showed up there, I guess, to play guitar and begin to engineer, and just took to it immediately. And it was a transistor Longiman console, discrete component transistor Longiman console, which was nothing compared to the tube ones, you know. And then, so he did that, and he had it sounded good. Altec 604E speakers, Altec power amps, that era. Played guitar, he's a very good guitar player.
On session?
Yeah, and he played with a lot of different people too. And, he didn't know that when you came to Nashville, you just didn't automatically hook up and start playing sessions. But he did, and he thought everybody else did too. You know, from there he started manufacturing stuff or doing maintenance.
Well, Fred was, when I first moved to town in '73, he was the guy that actually I ran into who we hit it off, and he helped me a lot. He actually got me in the business, and He hooked me up later on with Chip Young, which I had a long career with Young & Sound and everything. But when I first met Fred, he was probably doing more of the maintenance and stuff. He did have a studio, actually it was a remote truck, and it's called Celebration. And he had built a console for that, and that was his, I think he had done other little maintenance projects, but this is his first real console, and he built it with API components, so it was really a good sounding console.
Snakes that came out of that truck, he used that truck for a while, and I guess he sold it or went out of business or got more involved in the manufacturing. Whatever happened, something changed. And so he sold me, for my second truck, the cable snakes that he made with Elco connectors. And they're still in use today at Douglas Corner. Mervyn Luke owns Douglas Corner, bought my last truck, and he still has it down at Douglas Corner.
His second console was one he built for Chip Young. And at this time, the design of consoles at that point was really not clearly understood, because it was changing from 4-track to 16-track to 24-track. And what happened is Chip had cut this record, I Can Help, and it came into some good money, so he decided to get the first, as far as I know, 24-track studio, at least the first 24-track Ampex machine. It was an MM1100, and so he had to get Fred to build the console for him. And the console was kind of a hybrid. It had 2 modules on the input, and then it had a solid state monitor section. And the neat thing about that console, and the story goes, is Chip was pretty good at engineering. He was a great musician as well. But he had a lot of engineering experience, and he was tired of the idea of when he hit solo on all these little consoles that was around town, they would flip to a mono bus. It was be dry and it just kind of crappy sounding, I guess. And he just wanted the idea of, can you just solo where the thing would stay wherever it's panned with reverb and everything that was on it. And so he talked that idea over with Fred, and Fred came up with this idea to accommodate that console, and he called it Solo in Place. And what he did is just use some diodes and some relays and to accomplish it. And the idea was just a reverse logic. Solo is really the opposite of muting everything else. So he muted everything else. When he hit the solo button, everything else just muted. And as a byproduct of that, he come up with the idea of the programmable mutes too. So he had 2 like master mute buttons on that console.
Then he started building the mics, of which you have a couple. And the coolest thing about the mics was he made the frames out of baseball bat, aluminum baseball bats. He came and told me one day, he had like 4 or 5 bats with him. He came by my office. I said, you play softball? He said, no, I'm going to make these into microphone cases because they're just the right size and shape, and they're really sturdy, and they are sturdy. I mean, you can hit a baseball with them.
He just had a great sense of humor. I really think he was a great mixing engineer. I think that he probably didn't get a shot at some of the big studios. Where if you're mixing as an engineer, you only can cut the records on what comes through there. So if the only big names come through, he didn't really get a shot at that. But I thought he would have been capable. And he was a great guitar player too.
Freddie was a great engineer. He was a great engineer, but he was a good musician and a great technician. So they just sort of molded into each other. Great sense of humor, great guy.
Fred was also known for building power supplies for microphones in ammo cases, and that went well until Ricky Skaggs was taking one through the airport, and that didn't work out quite so well. So he changed the design after that. Accepting today for Fred Cameron is his son, Phillip Cameron. Come on up.
well, this is really special. A lot of people have come from Fred's family. His brother, Jimmy Cameron, and his wife, Cheryl, my sister, Marcy, and her husband, Mike, my brother, Mark, my wife, Sharon, Elizabeth, and my son, Chris, and his new bride, Siobhan, and my son, Stephen Cameron's here. I think a lot of you knew my dad, and if you knew him well, you'd know he was a tireless innovator. He was always looking at a way to improve things. It was an imperfect process. A lot of the schematics were on napkins, discarded ideas, and on Dad's passing, I think I had to go through 17 banker's boxes of schematics and didn't know what all of them were. But at the dinner table, sometimes he'd keep a pad of paper, and I realized he wasn't paying attention to me anymore. He was scribbling something. He was a keen observer. If folks liked a microphone or a piece of gear, he would look at the manufacturer's specs, but mainly he just wanted to know what was it that people really liked about it beyond the specs, and was there a way that he could transfer that into something that he could do. He had a reputation as a microphone tube guru, but he wasn't a tube snob. He liked solid-state processors and good solid-state equipment, but he'd do a lot of blind listening tests, and he would have other people and make them listen too, really listen, and he paid attention to what they picked, and sometimes the result was counterintuitive, and what he did was attempt to produce what people liked, even if it wasn't necessarily a flat sound. He used to say that the first 70 dB was the most important, and what he meant was that first chain in the signal path was what he was really spending most of his time on. It was easy to come up with what I thought was Dad's legacy. I witnessed him mostly as a mentor. In his early days, he taught guitar. He taught a lot of young engineers how to record. He helped artists and studio owners maintain their gear, and he taught technicians how things worked functionally. He used to mentor. If somebody wanted to know how to do something, he would actually spend the time. And I'd walk in, we worked together for years, and I would walk in on a conversation where he's explaining to someone how to fix their own mic, or the dark art of how to clean a capsule. We didn't receive any of those microphones or gear as work for a repair bill out the door. But he salvaged a lot of sessions. Sometimes people would get a piece of rental gear, and he talked them through how to make that piece of gear work, somebody in Burbank or Chicago even, and he would help them figure out a way to get through that session. And if you knew Dad, he had a saying that it's what you do with what you got. It wasn't always a high-end piece of gear. He could help with finding a way to have a solution with what you had on hand. And I want to thank the AES, and I'm really proud to receive this on behalf of my dad, Fred Cameron.